This is my Mount Rushmore of evil progressives.
What is the difference between a Jehovah's Witness and a progressive?
But instead he completely fabricates a homophobia divide, saying that the problem is there's a lot of straights out there who have problems with gays. So this is what, we need the straights to get their act together? The progressive, however, says education provided by us is so vital, everyone who doesn't chip in through property taxes should be put in a cage and shot if they resist. And
greetings, regressives. Welcome back to Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I will be Patrick Smith. Today's guest is a returning guest. Keith Knight has written another book, and this one is as awesome as the last, maybe even more so. Let's get into it.
From Dallas, Texas, this is Anarchast.
Keith Knight, the managing editor at the Libertarian Institute, host of the Don't Tread on Anyone, specifically, podcast, author of the Voluntarist Handbook, and now the author of the new book, Domestic Imperialism, 9 Reasons I Left Progressivism. Welcome back to the show. It's great to talk to you again. How are you?
I am doing fine, brother. Thank you so much for having me.
Cool. I'm always excited for my friends when they write books. It's a aspirational goal of mine that I have not yet achieved. So I'm just extra proud that you have now done it multiple times. Twice or more? Have I missed some?
Twice. And really, the first one, I only wrote the introduction, and afterward, everything else was just a collection of essays. It's titled The Voluntarist Handbook. And even this one, I tried to keep this show so short because the last one, 318 pages, really only attracts a lot of people who already agree with us. I wanted to make a provocative title like Domestic Imperialism and make it so short that even the people who don't agree with us are tempted to read 1 or 2 chapters.
And you can find our previous interview where we go over that book on this channel. Please enjoy, knock yourself out. It's amazing. Links, I'll make sure links to all this good stuff is down in the description. So we will do that. Let me show this awesome cover. Man, that's an eye catcher, isn't it? Can you tell me what led you to this cover? How did you design this? What did you have in mind? What were you trying to show?
There was a Democratic Socialists for America poster that almost looked exactly like this, except I forget who the original people were. But I thought this is my Mount Rushmore of evil progressives, starting with Woodrow Wilson in his book, A New Freedom. And the reason that book caught my mind more so than his presidency is because in that book, I remember him sort of redefining freedom as things that can be achieved with state effort, as opposed to a definition that's much closer to the ability to achieve your ends individually or collectively without initiating fraud or violence, something like that. So because Wilson really changed the way we look at something like freedom, I thought that was important. Not to mention, he's responsible for the declaration of war against Germany in April of 1917, gave us the Federal Reserve Act with the state monopolizing the currency, plan that was clearly cooked up in Jekyll Island, as even Frank Vanderlip, who was at this meeting, wrote about in the Saturday Evening Post. He instituted the income tax, had people arrested for opposing entrance into the First World War, which conscripted, enslaved 2.8 million men in America against their will, 4.8 million soldiers total, and got 116,000 men killed because we had to stop Kaiser Wilhelm and have regime change in Germany. If we take him out, no one bad in Germany could rise again. So unfortunately, he saved the world from democracy by giving it to Mussolini, Hitler, and the Bolshevik regime. That's why I had to start with Wilson. I think the biggest problem today is people who are very confident in their approach to advocating an expansive state, whereas even conservatives, Democrats who are more establishment or neocons, they're met with some suspicion as to, well, they're in this for themselves. So it's really progressivism that I think is the greatest opportunity for the state to grow its power. That's why progressivism is widely advocated by many Democrats, some Republicans when it comes to theories of social justice, Hollywood, corporate marketing campaigns, human resource departments, and especially the corporate marketing campaigns, basically assuming that all inequalities are the result of discrimination, and the solution to said discrimination is for the state to use coercion against peaceful people to achieve a more equitable outcome. Those main theories are all progressive ideas, along with the recognition of the legitimacy of welfare, state interference in the healthcare industry, state interference or provision of education, state regulation of commerce. All these are progressive ideas. And because progressivism, I think, is the most popular form of statism, that's why I wanted to write a small book, hopefully trying to refute it.
It's not a massive book either. You know, to your credit, you achieved your goal there. Is that Ocasio-Cortez on the right? Who is that?
It is clearly Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Yes.
What has she even done to put her next to these terrible people? Like, how did she earn that hatred? What for you?
Imagine all these people did all these atrocious things based on the concept of a coercive apparatus is actually here to help. All these years later, someone is making it cool, hip, and is very attractive, promoting an increase in the power of the very thing that these men committed atrocities under, or probably didn't commit any atrocities by themselves, just ordered public servants to do it on their behalf. So because AOC is really popularizing this among the youth and making it hip to be a progressive and selling progressivism as a virtuous, kind-hearted thing, that's why she is there.
Fair enough. All right. So I said we were going to talk about something else before the book, but we're already in the middle of the book. So I'm going to do that, and we'll hit the other stuff maybe at the end for some wholesome come together between libertarians. So your book goes through the reasons, and it's very succinct. It's very biting. It doesn't, there's not a lot of fat on it. It's just straight to the point with clear arguments and clear evidence, and it's beautiful. So I want to go through it. Your 9 reasons, just like high level, you guys are going to have to read the book for sure to get into the meat of this. But reason number 1 was arbitrary divides. I had never thought about it from this perspective. Now, my history, my background is coming from the right. I was raised sort of Republican, and so I come from it from that direction, and I'd never experienced the problems in my thought processes that I think you did. And so I'm fascinated to hear from that perspective. Arbitrary divides. You said the Omar Mateen murders were about the U.S. bombing Syria, but it was spun as anti-LGBT. So this was Omar Mateen was the guy that shot up the what was it, the Pulse nightclub?
Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida. Yeah.
All I remember from that was the anti-LGBT narrative. I had no idea about what your book taught about. Could you briefly go over like the phone call with the police?
Yes. So on June 12th of 2016, Omar Mateen enters the Pulse nightclub, murders 49 people, injures 53, holds the survivors hostage, and calls 911. And the goal of terrorism, of course, is not to conceal your motives and keep everyone guessing. The goal is to have a shortcut to fame so you could really popularize a message or an idea. So before I read that, here's how Barack Obama, the leader of the free world, sitting president at the time, summarized the events to the population. He said, "This was an attack on the LGBT community. Americans were targeted because we're a country that has learned to welcome everyone, no matter who you are or who you love, and hatred towards people because of sexual orientation, regardless of where it comes from, is a betrayal of what's best in us." So there is a way to falsify this theory. He says it's about the LGBT community. What you can do is look at the opportunities this terrorist had to amplify a message and see what he focused on. His most important message was when he finally got a hold of the FBI before a SWAT team came in and rightfully killed him. Here are some excerpts from the phone call. "You have to tell America to stop bombing Syria and Iraq. They are killing a lot of innocent people. What am I to do here when my people are getting killed over there? You get what I'm saying? You need to stop the U.S. airstrikes. They need to stop the U.S. airstrikes, okay? I feel the pain of the people getting killed in Syria and Iraq. They need to stop bombing Syria and Iraq. The U.S. is collaborating with Russia, and they are killing innocent women and children, okay?" He goes on like that for like 18 of the 23 pages. It's just so repetitive. He's saying, this is exactly what is causing me to do this. This is vengeance. This, just as anyone who lived in America and saw what happened on 9/11 on September 12th of 2001 was willing to say, I will join the military and go do some killing on our behalf against the people who are responsible for this. So that is a classic example of why progressivism, I think, is just so dangerous, because you had a very clear divide that Barack Obama could have given the world. He said, look, there's two types of people who would achieve their ends peacefully and those who do so violently, people who do so honestly and those who commit fraud. We as Americans have to decide, what kind of culture we want to be. Omar Mateen is violent. We're against violence only in, defensive purposes. He could have approached this from almost any way, but instead he completely fabricates a homophobia divide, saying that the problem is there's a lot of straights out there who have problems with gays. So this is what we need: the straights to get their act together and start treating homosexuals very well, which of course is, something valuable in and of itself, I guess. But he neglects to mention a study by the Council on Foreign Relations actually looked at the number of bombs dropped on Iraq and Syria in that year, 2016. And the total, I believe, is 24,187. That's the Council on Foreign Relations summary of 2016, just in Iraq and Syria alone, not to mention Yemen, Libya, Pakistan, Somalia.
It's hard to even imagine that number of bombs. It's just like...
Oh, yeah. It's wild.
So clearly it was about the gays. Okay.
Yes, that's a short. So when there was a very clear divide, there's peaceful people and violent people. What the progressives used it for was to divide people of goodwill based on something arbitrary. And they do this all the time, saying, there are disparities between blacks and whites. Well, there's also disparities between blacks and Hispanics and Asians and whites. Men are 50% of the population, yet 95% of those killed by police. Not generally because of discrimination. There could be instances of cops feeling more danger coming from a man than a woman, and they're more likely to shoot. But the reason for the disparity is men tend to be more violent than women, and they tend to resist the police more. That is an explanation. That's not me saying anyone who resists the police deserves to be shot, obviously. Just coming up with explanations as to why such disparities exist. So my claim is, instead of having fake divides based on something arbitrary, either accidents of birth or something in that arena, we should have a true divide, which is the violence versus voluntarism spectrum.
What is the difference between a Jehovah's Witness and a progressive?
So the Jehovah's Witness and the progressive very often like to share their ideas with others and get people onto their side, onto their team, and advocate and believe the same things that they do. So in that sense, they are quite similar, promoting ideas, trying to recruit people to join their organization. The great thing about the Jehovah's Witness that the progressive does not have is the Jehovah's Witness, even when they are terrified you might spend an eternity burning in a fiery pit forever, they still give you the freedom to disassociate with their organization. They say, you need this Bible. It's basically the secret to the universe. This is the education you need in life. It was written by the creator of the universe. They still let you opt out of funding it if you don't think it's right for you. The progressive, however, says education provided by us is so vital, everyone who doesn't chip in through property taxes should be put in a cage and shot if they resist. And anyone who doesn't abide by these commercial regulations implemented by the state, they should be threatened and put in a cage if they resist. So while the Jehovah's Witness stakes seem to be much higher, we're talking about not just life and death, but eternity of where you're going to spend. Is it with the creator of the universe in pure happiness? Is it with Satan in a terrible place forever? They still give you the freedom to disassociate with their organization. They don't force you to read the Bible. They don't force you to attend the church. But the progressive does have compulsory education and truancy laws. And the progressive does have taxation and tariff, something that are a method of collecting funds against people's will to fund things that they think are for the greater good. So they both have ideas. The Jehovah's Witness, high as the stakes may be, still respect you enough to let you live with your own decision, while
higher
the
stakes.
Progressive does not.
Yeah,
Much
higher.
Yeah.
Higher, yeah, very. Okay, so now I want to challenge you from the other direction. And I love this type of conversation because it really sort of illustrates how not occult the ideas that we talk about are. And because it involves self-criticism, we are able to be self-critical and hopefully do that in a constructive way, which we will hopefully get to, at the end about something unrelated. But or I guess in your reason for on government failure, let me read this paragraph that you wrote. It's called a cleansing process. A free market system is superior morally and economically to progressivism because it allows people voluntarily to opt out of funding or participating with bad actors without the threat of going to jail. While the process is far from perfect, it is far superior to one that does not allow for such peaceful disassociation. How is the free market system not perfect?
Well, it is not perfect in the case of humans are still fallible. There is still greed where someone's trying to get one over on another person. There is still information asymmetry, as I mentioned in the market failure chapter. So this is simply taking the claims that people have of the free market, specifically people like Tom Hartman and Cenk Uygur, very popular progressives. These are what they say are criticisms of the free market, and they are criticisms of the free market, but the reason is because the free market consists of having people. And anytime you have people acting within a system, they are going to act with regard to their own self-interest. Anytime you watch a YouTube video or something on Netflix, you are valuing your self-interest more than all of the homeless people, all of the starving people who could really use your help, and you should allocate it to them. People just think of themselves initially because they don't know what's best for others. And even if they do spend tons of time on other people, that work might not pay off or might not be appreciated. So it's an issue of knowledge and incentives. So because of the universal existence of self-interest and information asymmetry, that the free market will not be perfect. No system ever will be.
So the problem with capitalism is the people. and specifically, it's the failings of the human species, maybe. And doesn't that mean that these problems are to some degree completely intractable? Like that's just part of the species. And is this, there's an argument I really don't like much, but I find it a disgusting argument when talking about democracy. And you've heard this one a million times. Like, democracy is a terrible form of government. It's just, less terrible than all the others or something like that. That kind of feels like this argument about capitalism. Like these are problems that are intractable, but this is the best idea that we have. What are your thoughts there?
Yes. So when it comes to the concept of responding to the criticisms of market failure, people are greedy, people are short-sighted. There's some people have more information than others and might take advantage of them. One thing to do is to completely deny that, but there is just no denying it. Anytime, you have a conversation with someone, they have a great deal of information that you don't have. Doesn't matter which two people are talking on the planet. So yes, all of these alleged shortcomings exist in the free market, but it's only because the free market is made up of humans, and humans in any society, in any form of social arrangement, will have the same exact shortcomings. So to say that people are fallible or could be misled, therefore the state is legitimate, is shockingly ridiculous, because all of those shortcomings apply to the same human beings when they get a vote once every 4 years on who should rule the rest of them. And they have much less of an incentive. So if we say that human beings are irrational and they're greedy and, all of the other criticisms people say justify government regulation, this was actually responded to by a gentleman, Mike Munger, who I cite on page 71. He says, "The problem is this: every flaw in consumers is worse in voters. You might object, that's obvious, they are the same people. That's exactly the point that advocates for government corrections of market failure are missing, folks. In artificial laboratory settings and sometimes in real-world choice settings, people are bad at making decisions. But they are better at choosing in markets where they have prices and brand names than those people trying to choose in democratic political settings where advertising is intentionally misleading and party brand names are almost meaningless. So, in other words, he's saying the idea that humans are fallible is a universal. It will always exist everywhere. The question is, which system should we want fallible human beings operating in? A political process where they get to vote on something and have no incentive to get informed, and that vote is coercively implemented on others, or one in which they can freely disassociate with bad actors and associate with people who they like, spending money that they can only get through voluntary means or original appropriation. So that is my reasoning for the market failure argument.
The worst that you can have in a free market situation, if you have a severe information disparity, you can have a person that just walks away. They're like, oh, I suspect that I don't know something important to this transaction, so I'm going to not consent to it and maybe try again tomorrow and wait until I learn more. When you have the government involved, you have both an information disparity, who knows how much stuff has been classified, who knows just what we don't know about what's going on in the world and in the government, and you have guns pointed at you. So I would say that's a triply probably or worse problem to have. I don't want to give away your entire book by going point by point, but there's a lot of good stuff in here. A little mind blower, a contradiction I hadn't thought of previously, was in chapter 5. You illustrated how the labor theory of value and welfare were a contradiction. I would love to hear you talk about that.
So the labor theory of value assumes that all value is derived from labor. It is. I'm really trying not to strawman it, but that is how it's been summarized by people like Richard Wolff, Karl Marx. So I try not to respond to that with a straw man and saying, well, so if people make mud pies all day, then that's how you can run the economy so long as people work. I said, what is a really, really good example of something progressives advocate that involves people acquiring money in the absence of first performing labor? Because the assumption is that only the workers in an organization should be able to earn income that the organization generates, because non-workers or owners and managers don't do any work, and not only don't do any work, are actually parasites on the organization itself. So the question of, do progressives advocate anything that involves giving people money who have not necessarily produced the product that is first sold in order to generate that money? And an obvious answer is the welfare that they constantly advocate. Another example is the concept of pensions. Even if, well, when you were younger, you paid into this pension system, now you get out of it, that's still not relevant. At that moment, you are not a worker, and you're engaged in exploitation on the current workers. You're benefiting while they're working. Now, any sane person could say, well, what if someone's really poor and they need charity and assistance? Then voluntary welfare is totally legitimate. So under the free market, you can totally justify something like social safety nets in the voluntary realm. But any sort of democratic socialism cannot justify such a thing, or even in the case of pensions. If you are not currently a worker, if you're just retired, you don't get any money because you're not currently working. But any sane person would say, well, how about they engage in a mutually beneficial contract with other people so they could postpone consumption, save their money, or invest their money? Not to mention, if the workers own the factors of production, and everything is done democratically, first of all, you have a bunch of people who are totally ignorant about how to run an organization having a huge say, and that's just terrible. But second of all, if I work at Walmart, I wouldn't necessarily also want to own stock in Walmart because I wouldn't have a very diversified portfolio. I'd want to take some of it and buy General Motors, General Electric, I don't know, whatever else you can think of, maybe have some social media, maybe have some oil stocks. So it's not beneficial, and it's absolutely just ridiculous to think the average person has the knowledge that, you know, a well-versed manager has. And it's immoral because it stops people from contracting. So even the most favorable idea of progressivism is, all right, well, yeah, the state's a big bunch of murderers and they're all corrupt, but they're bought off by corporations. And we get to those corporations by turning firms into worker cooperatives. So I'm a really compassionate progressive. So I'm different from the rest of them. unfortunately, you're not. You're just as bad.
All these different reasons that we're talking about, did they, in over what span of time did they come to mind for you?
Probably 10 years or so. And I
okay.
didn't ever write them down until I was just going through all the books in my mini library here when I had been asked to give a speech at a place called the University Club in Phoenix. So I just wrote, I came up with these 9 reasons or so and gave the speech, and I got good feedback. So I decided to turn it into a book. I bet it was 10 years from the first time I listened to Glenn Beck until, gosh, people like Stefan Molyneux and Larkin Rose really inspired me.
Glenn Beck, huh? I was a Glenn Beck watcher for several years. So he was on a libertarian arc for a long time. And I guess he just sort of stopped short several years ago. But that was interesting. What was your interaction with Glenn Beck and his ideas?
So this is the importance of first impressions, because I'm always going to have a favorable opinion of him, because when I first came across his work, he was really cool and he was brilliant and he was teaching me something that I had just never heard. He had said, there's all these arguments in favor of the Affordable Care Act. Of course, healthcare costs have drastically risen since the Affordable Care Act has been passed. He goes, look, there's costs and benefits on the economic side. It could discourage work, it could encourage laziness, and that could have long-term effects, whatever. The bottom line is there's a part in here called the individual mandate, and this requires everyone to purchase something, whether they want to or not, against their will. Now, maybe people should have health insurance, and they should try the carnivore diet, and they should exercise and be nice to their kids and call their mother every Sunday. But the question is not should they. The question is, should they be forced to and put in jail by the state if they resist and shot if they resist the police officers? Okay, well, at that point, obviously no. And that was just so clear to me. And it took me quite a while to take that principle and extend it to the military, Medicare, Medicaid, education, Social Security, and everything else. But I had literally never been introduced to that concept before. And I almost immediately went, well, doesn't the same thing apply to Medicare? And it was not like, oh, so it is legitimate because, but we do it with Medicare, so the ACA must be good. It's clearly wrong to do with the ACA, and Medicare and Social Security and anything else are not necessarily different in principle. Certainly, if the Catholic Church or the Koch brothers or any other organization on the planet tried coercing you into doing something for your own good and wouldn't even let you opt out, certainly we would call it a scam. So why do I have this blatant double standard? So that, just itched at my brain for 4 years and I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I started a channel and then joined the Libertarian Institute and then wrote this book. And now I'm talking to you.
Jeremy Kaufman says that a person's bent towards libertarianism and liberty and freedom is somewhat genetically selected. It's not all nurture. There's nature involved. And I interview people like you that they have an innate need for consistency of their ideas that they hold. Most people, I don't think, have that. And so I'm wondering if you have any idea of where you got that from, or is it always just been how you think? You're always looking to make your ideas match and fit together like, a puzzle. Where did you get that?
Maybe it was some time ago when I was in school. Maybe there was just some incident where I felt like I had been tricked and felt so insecure that I said, I am never going to be vulnerable mentally ever again. So if I say anything, I'm going to have tons of arguments in my favor. I'm going to do tons of research and make sure that I've crossed all the I's and that I've crossed all the T's and dotted the I's. So maybe it's that sort of either insecurity or passion that I've had for, just something like this. That could be it. I think Kaufman's probably has a very good point. The reality is, though, that the Iron Law of Oligarchy is always in effect when human beings cooperate. So it's not like, 7 billion people in the world got to convince 7 billion people of the non-aggression principle. Whether it's the Bolshevik Revolution, American Revolution, whether it's the invention of the car, invention of the cell phone, invention of Seinfeld, all of these great things came about as a causal result of very few people passionately working towards an end goal. So that's not me saying anything good about the Bolshevik Revolution. It's just saying the human race's capacity for change does not necessarily rely on an overwhelming vast majority. It relies on a passionate, very small portion of people. That's my understanding.
The Iron Law of Oligarchy. This is like the engine of the world in Ayn Rand speak. Would you say that's a fair equation to make?
You know, I would love to hear Ayn Rand's response to this. It's like she totally understood so much of where it stems from, or just saw the existence of some people having a great deal of power and influence in society and said, that's not inherently bad. So it is bad in the state in many cases, but it's not necessarily bad in the voluntary sector. So I think she was certainly onto something. For those who are not familiar with this, it's summarized as follows. All complex organizations, regardless of how democratic they are when started, eventually develop into oligarchies, since no sufficiently large and complex organization can function purely as a direct democracy. Power within an organization will always get delegated to individuals within that group, elected or otherwise. So the greatest evidence of this was used by, it was either James Burnham or Robert McKells, who said, take the concept of a union. You might think, well, there's people who believe in, capitalism, which is where there's bosses and then workers. And then there's people who believe in a much more egalitarian approach where everyone's involved. So you could either have socialism, democracy, or somewhat of a workers' union. The problem is that this too is going to result inevitably in a very small number of people having almost all the power, because not everyone wants to go to this union meeting. Not everyone is going to speak their mind at the meeting. Of those who speak, not everyone's going to have equally good ideas. Of the people who have good ideas, are they able to be equally persuasive? Are they equally good looking? Are they equally likely to persuade all the voting members of the union? And when you get down to it, it turns out it's like Jimmy Hoffa and his three friends control like 95% of the union, even though, you have tens of thousands of truckers in the organization. So the idea that things should not be decided by an elite few, almost anything in anytime human beings get together, some people are better than others at it. So those people more or less take charge, and people will proudly delegate the decision making to them. When it comes to the great things like our cars, our computers, our microphones, great innovations in science and healthcare, it's not usually the result of a democratic process. Your favorite comedian is usually one or a few people who write his jokes. We don't all vote on his jokes, and then those are the best comedians because we all voted on their material. To the contrary, it's a few people deciding and then engaging in free market exchanges, and they tend to produce great products and services when they're free to. So this is why progressivism is a fool's errand. It's not like it. So first of all, it's not even desirable for everyone to have an equal say in things because they have such different levels of education, and some people are outright terrible. But it's so it's not even desirable, but it's also not physically achievable because not everyone has the same amount of information, the same motivation, the same moral compass. So because of these inherent inequalities, there's always a division of labor. Within that division of labor, some people have a lot more power than others. So whether it's Bolshevik Russia or United States of America, you're always going to have some people at the top of any organization, fascist, communist, capitalist, free market, democratic, socialist. That's why progressivism is just an inherent fool's errand, that it's a circle that can never be squared.
No two people have the same anything. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very well said. All right. I want to talk about one more thing from the book, and then I'm going to tease something else to get people to go buy the book. This graph, I think, everyone needs to just make this part of their worldview. This is so telling about the world. Let me describe the graph for the people listening on audio only. The title of the graph is Price Changes from January 2000 to December 2020. On the x-axis is time. On the vertical axis is the price plotted over time. So you have a bunch of different consumer goods, services, and wages being plotted on this graph. Hospital services, college tuition, college textbooks, medical care services, clothing, cell phones, TVs, toys, new cars, things like that. Some of these lines go up over time. Some of these lines either stay horizontal or go down over time. Keith, tell us about what the differentiating factor is between the ones that are going up and the ones that are not.
So there is a concept that a lot of people generally believe in, and it's that inflation is an increase in the price of a good or service. Notice this does not differentiate between when there's an increase in the money supply, which increase costs or prices, and when there's a change in supply and demand. So first of all, inflation is not an increase in prices. Inflation is an increase in the money supply. The high prices are a result of said inflation. The second thing is that inflation, or increase in prices, is caused by corporate greed. And when things are privatized, corporations can be as greedy as they want. Under capitalism, things are privatized. Therefore, prices go up as a cause or result of capitalism. Well, there's actually a way that we could measure such a thing. What we could do is take the most publicly financed products and services, which are also the most regulated, and look at their price change over time. And we could compare that to the price change in the least regulated, least subsidized sectors of the economy. Because it's not inevitable that prices will go up. Henry Ford became wealthy by drastically lowering the costs of the Model T and making it more affordable. The Wright brothers didn't just make private planes. They made planes that almost everyone had access to. Places like Southwest Airlines didn't just have flights for the one percenters. They made flights more affordable for the average person. Cornelius Vanderbilt made riding on steamships much cheaper. So we do have tons of examples of prices going down. George Eastman made the camera much more affordable over time because of his innovations. So the idea that prices inherently go up under capitalism or as a result of nature, there is almost no evidence for. So what this graph indicates is that the most subsidized, the most regulated aspects of the economy increase in price much more so than other less subsidized, less regulated areas. There's a reason for this. When a industry or organization is subsidized, instead of them getting money as a cause or result of pleasing customers, they get money as a cause or result of pleasing politicians. So the customers actually take a back seat. So they don't have a very big incentive to increase quality or decrease the price so more people could access their product or service. And when things are regulated, you drastically increase the barriers to entry in order for you to get in the industry and start providing goods and services for other customers. The more regulations, the harder it is to start the business, the harder it is for you to get a foot in the door, the more this creates oligopolies, the fewer options employees have of where to work, fewer options consumers have of where to buy products and services. So these shortages do create higher prices than you otherwise would have under a system of free market exchange. Prices rise, not because of too much voluntarism, but because of too much violence.
Well said, as always. Okay, I want to tease one thing. You talk about in the book, and I want everybody, go buy the book. It's not expensive. It's not long. I think you even give it away for free in PDF form on Libertarian Institute's website. There will be a link in the description. You talk about in chapter 7, voter suppression versus economic suppression. You say it's very common for people to become the very things that they set out to oppose. And then you talk about progressive imperialism. Can you just tease that chapter for us?
So progressives will confidently say that they're against British imperialism coercively imposing itself on the people of South Africa, as if Nelson Mandela's regime coercively imposing himself on the people of South Africa is any different in principle. So it turns out that The domestic population of governments are simply the people the government is at war with, but have just decided to surrender. That is my general thesis. I go on to explain it in that chapter.
Read the book, guys. All right, I'll leave you. We'll leave the book off with a paragraph that I loved from his afterword. Quote, "It's common to see progressives who offer me no job, no products, and no services claim that my real enemies are people who voluntarily offer me those things. Like a jealous spouse, they become abusive when they feel insecure, rather than do the work that it takes to improve themselves." I loved that quote. What an excellent book. Well done, sir. Round of applause. Just imagine people. I mean, well done. Very well done.
Thank you, Patrick. I appreciate it.
Okay, cool. So last thing I want to pick your brain on, because this comes up, I don't know, 5 times a year. There's some prominent libertarian, some other prominent libertarians, and they disagree on some point of principle. And it erupts into a Twitter debate or whatever, where everybody circles the wagons, they pick sides. You're not a libertarian, you're not a libertarian, no one's a libertarian, whatever. There is a constructive internal critique that can happen. There is a destructive internal critique that can happen. And so the thing that brought this up was Walter Block took a public position. Walter Block, who I love, by the way. I have voiced his audiobooks, Defending the Undefendable 2. He's a great guy. I've interviewed him many times. I love talking to him. I don't agree with him on everything. But he took a position on the Israel-Palestine conflict that Israel is basically fully justified in doing whatever it takes to rout Hamas out of Palestine. Whatever it takes. And I don't think I'm being disingenuous, and you can disagree with me, please, if I am, in him taking that position of Israel needs to just do whatever it takes. They need to, collectively, Israel has been injured, and so collectively Israel is justified in exacting whatever actions they need to exact to get rid of the Hamas threat, even if that means injuring innocent people. Viewers of my Disenthrall channel will have seen the videos where, even before Block said that, I was disagreeing. I don't think in terms of collectives. Ethics doesn't function in terms of collectives. I don't want to make this a conversation about the right and wrong of it, beyond whatever degree you'd like. But then Hoppe recently wrote an article that was very stringent. What's the word? I mean, not excommunicate. Did he say excommunicate? No, he said, what did Hoppe say? Help me out here. It was the strongest possible language.
Yeah.
It was like, you have proven yourself with this position as not a libertarian. Rothbard would have disowned you or something like that. And I wanted to see what your thoughts were, and I wanted to get your thoughts on internal critique, libertarian on libertarian internal critique, how to do it constructively, how not to. What do you think?
Yeah, I would say the best thing to do, especially in this case, if you're Hoppe and Block, who have been friends for, I guess, 40 or 50 years, something wild, I'm shocked that they took something like this public. I have to assume that Hoppe at least called Walter, gave him some time. I am very hesitant to call anyone out just before I get a hold of them, get these specifics, and you got to give people some time to either cool down. Just as people went crazy after they saw what happened on 9/11, a lot of either Israelis or Jewish people were very hurt by the October 7th images. And unfortunately, even in their memory, it's hard for the populations of the world to sympathize for that too long, because almost immediately the civilian death toll in Gaza got up to 25,000, and now you have further occupations.
Is it
in
really
the West
that
Bank
high?
and all these other, yeah.
Wow.
That is according to research by people like Dave DeCamp, Connor Freeman, Kyle Anzalone, John J. Mearsheimer, who was on Judge Napolitano's show. The number of 25,000 is where it's currently at, more or less right now, unfortunately.
Civilians.
So, no, this would be 25,000 dead overall.
Total. Okay.
Israel has come out and said roughly they believed 10,000 are Hamas fighters. The problem is, even on October 7th, allegedly, according to the BBC, there were about 10 other organizations who orchestrated these attacks with Hamas. So there's no reason to believe that, first of all, this is going to decrease the amount of terrorism that exists. And second, it's not even getting after the other terrorist groups who they claim are such a big threat. As a matter of fact, support for Hamas, according to the Times of Israel, was actually the plan of Benjamin Netanyahu. So they authorized money going from Qatar to members of Hamas because they saw it as a way to get a much more religious organization on board with, who they thought would be a little more holy. That at least was how they sold it. Religious people might have much more of a conscience. And then second, they were seen as such a small grade terrorist organization that no one could ever, these people can't get a seat at the United Nations. They're a bunch of ragtag terrorists who don't even have F-16s. So they're the perfect enemy. It's someone to justify going after without ever saying, here is our partner for negotiation who we're going to ignore. So
it was like controlled opposition? Is that kind of what you're saying? Like Israel funded Hamas as controlled opposition?
Yes, I'm not whether or not it was direct funding, but it was explicitly a policy of Netanyahu's Likud administration, saying that anyone who wants to thwart the erection of a Palestinian state must support Hamas, something to that extent. This is from the Times of Israel, and I waited like 2 weeks before I started sharing this because I go, well, this is going to have to be retracted or there's going to be some clarification. But this is referred to generally as a Pied Piper strategy. So Hillary Clinton actually had meetings, which were released in WikiLeaks, where they had said, it's going to be hard to run against Ben Carson or even someone like Ted Cruz. We should support a candidate who's a Republican who we know we can beat. So what we should do is support Donald Trump and make sure that he's talked about by all our friends in the news stations. It's Pied Piper WikiLeaks strategy. I promise you can find this. Whenever politicians come together, they think about not only how can they win, but who would they like to run against and who would they like their opposition to be. This is a classic case of blowback, as well as the term could be used. So as far as how these things should be dealt with, I think first, personally, I think then publicly, because the great response to, who keeps bad people in check if there's not a government going around arresting people? Well, people care a great deal about their reputation. So, reputation is one way to get people to incentivize good behavior, disincentivize bad behavior, and punish people who have done bad things. I certainly, I've had Walter Block on the show, I think 3 or 4 times. We've exchanged emails for years. I have not had a conversation with him, so I'm not going to comment on him. But that's my general approach. First, go to them personally. And then if what they're advocating is so egregious, then for not only just protecting yourself and saying, I disassociate with this person, but you do want to protect this great thing we've inherited from people like Frederick Bastiat and Lysander Spooner, so you want to keep the name pure. So that is a great method of, I think, incentive to keep people good on certain issues.
What do you think about the... so, first of all, I agree completely that if you have a prominent person misrepresenting what you deem to be the ideas of liberty, libertarianism, anarcho-capitalism, I think it is important to publicly speak out to whatever degree that you can. That's an ideological immune system. And I think constructive criticism is very healthy and vital. In fact, I think our ideas have progressed faster than pretty much any other previous ideology on the planet. You're welcome to disagree with me if you do, because we have very, very robust internal critique about what is and isn't libertarian, what constitutes, the ins and outs of the non-aggression principle and all the ideas of voluntarism. I think that's our superpower, and as long as we recognize that as a benefit that can go too far, and to kind of rein in the insanity on the outer edges, I think we continue to embrace that, and we will continue to sort of lead the world in the ideas of liberty and property and peaceful coexistence. So I do want to advertise that first thing I did was reach out to Walter Block. He has agreed to come on the show, so we are going to be talking about both his position and Hoppe's response and Walter's response to Hoppe's response, and we're going to talk through it, and we're going to try and show what a constructive disagreement looks like, because I think disagree with Block's position on that. Yeah, so that's kind of what I wanted to say on that, and I wanted to get your thoughts as well, so I appreciate that. That's
so one thing.
Go ahead.
One thing, just because this is such an in-depth topic, it's really hard to know where to start. What changed my mind on the Israel-Palestine issue, if there's one place to start, it would be a document titled The Iron Wall. It was a 7-page document published by Zeev Jabotinsky. This was the founder of Ergon, also had the Jewish Defense League in Odessa. Ergon, along with Stern and Haganah, were the people who more or less were terrorist organizations who intimidated the population at large in Palestine under the British mandate to eventually accept the state of Israel as being the legitimate monopolist on that land. In this paper, he says the following: voluntary agreement not possible. There can be no voluntary agreement between ourselves and the Palestine Arabs. He goes on to say, there is only one thing the Zionists want, and it is that one thing that the Arabs do not want. For that is, by way which the Jews should gradually become the majority, and then a Jewish government would follow automatically, and the future of the Arab minority would depend on the goodwill of the Jews, and the minority status is not a good thing, as the Jews themselves are never so tired of pointing out. The Zionists only want one thing, Jewish immigration, and Jewish immigration is what the Arabs don't want. So, he finishes by saying, Zionist colonization must either stop or else proceed regardless of the native population, which means that it can proceed and develop only under the protection of a power that is independent of the native population behind an iron wall, which the native population cannot breach. In this matter, there is no difference between our militarists and our vegetarians, except the first prefer that the iron wall should consist of Jewish soldiers, and the others are content that they should be British. So, this is giving you an insight that this was far from, there was a state and everyone came together and then there was a big vote. What happened is, you literally had people, Ergon, Stern, and Haganah, using violence against civilians in order to intimidate them into fleeing and accepting that, accepting the current Jewish ruling majority. Just as the Bolshevik regime had to use violence and terror, so people knew to stop obeying the Tsar and start obeying the Bolsheviks. So European colonialists had to do this to the Native Americans. This is the nature of states. So whereas previously, when I was younger, I thought it was, there's two countries, Israel and Palestine, and they've just been fighting forever. What actually happened is this was a colonization process that the British mandate was able to gain power over after the First World War and the Ottoman Empire fell down. Organizations like Ergon bombed places like the King David Hotel where the British soldiers were, so they could have more control over the area and weren't subject to British or American influence at the time. This is the nature of reality of all states. The problem is, a lot of us think that Israel is the exception to something like this. It's not. That's what got me on my road to thinking that, well, all states are equally evil. But when it comes to this issue, the Palestinians are certainly not just some terrible, savage barbarians who hate Jews for being successful.
Keith Knight, thank you for the excellent conversation. It's wonderful to hear your voice again. Where can people find you? Libertarianinstitute.org. All right. Please, guys, check out his book. Links to everything will be in the description. What a pleasure. I look forward to next time. Have a great one.
Take care, brother. Bye.